8 teenage girls vanished in 2006 on their way to a summer music performance. Their school bus never arrived, and no trace of them was ever found. A decade later, a forest worker stumbled upon something buried beneath roots and pine needles, something that had no business being there. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Franklin High School's music program had sent its advanced ensemble, 8 girls from the sophomore and junior classes, to a regional showcase near Eugene, Oregon. The girls had performed on Friday night. By all accounts, they were happy, relaxed, excited for the next leg of the tour, a summer retreat hosted by a sister school in the foothills of the Cascades. They were last seen boarding a chartered yellow school bus in the early morning hours of Sunday, June 11, 2006. The bus never arrived at its destination. Search teams were deployed within 48 hours. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers combed the stretch of state highway between Eugene and their intended stop in Lapine. Nothing was found. No tire tracks, no debris, no witnesses, no signal from the bus's shortwave radio. It was as if 8 girls and an entire vehicle had vanished into thin air. For years, the case was one of Oregon's most perplexing missing persons investigations. Tips came in, all of them dead ends. Psychics, conspiracy theorists, and supposed sightings in Nevada and Idaho only muddied the waters. In time, national attention faded, local memory dulled. The case went cold. Until the morning of July 18, 2016. The discovery was made by a forest technician named Kevin Staley, who was surveying storm-damaged trees along a seldom-used access trail through the Crooked Spur Preserve. The summer had been dry, and Kevin's job was to flag areas at risk of spontaneous fall due to root exposure. That morning, while scanning the base of a leaning spruce, he spotted a corner of molded plastic jutting from the earth. Thinking it might be a discarded cooler or abandoned hunter's supply bin, he dug around the edges. What he uncovered was an olive green storage container, warped by heat, one side split open along the seam. Inside, there was a cello bow, snapped cleanly at the middle, a roll of black cloth used for covering keyboards, and a torn coral sash, white silk with red embroidery along the edge. One end was stained a deep rust brown. Kevin, a former music student himself, knew exactly what he was looking at. He backed away and called it in. By that afternoon, the site was taped off. Forensics arrived just before sunset. The container was removed with care and transported to the state lab in Salem under ultraviolet light. The stains tested positive for human blood. Soil analysis dated the burial to within the last 12 to 18 months. This suggested that the items had not remained hidden since 2006, but had been moved, or perhaps reburied, long after the girls disappeared. Detective Naomi Reeds was one of the few on the force who still remembered the case from the early days. As a rookie, she had helped coordinate paperwork during the initial investigation. She remembered the photographs, girls in black dresses, holding sheet music and grinning backstage. She remembered their names. She had attended the same high school. When the lab results came in, she requested permission to reopen the file. The first call she made was to the family of Mia Thompson, the first-chair violinist of the group. Her parents had long since moved out of state, but Naomi tracked them down through their church's alumni bulletin. She didn't tell them everything, just that something had been found, enough to merit a second look, enough to matter. Then she made the next call, then another. By the end of the week, 6 of the 8 families had been contacted. 2 had disconnected numbers. One mother had passed away, another father refused to take the call, but the rest came, quietly, without news crews, without ceremony. 10 years is long enough to harden grief into silence, but not long enough to erase it. They met in the same room the original task force had once used, a conference room in the old municipal building near 6th and Bailey. Naomi stood at the head of the table and showed them the contents of the box. Some wept, some sat frozen. All of them recognized something: a case, a scarf, a tag with a name partially faded, a girl's handwriting on the inside seam. Naomi told them this wasn't a confirmation. No remains had been recovered, no clear cause of death, but the discovery changed the nature of the case. It shifted it from open-ended disappearance to possible homicide. That meant new resources, new pressure, a reason to search again. Later that evening, Naomi returned to her office and pulled out the original evidence log. She skimmed through faded notes about the bus, the driver, the route. Nothing had ever stood out. The driver had passed a polygraph. The bus maintenance had been clean. No signs of breakdown, no surveillance footage from gas stations, just a clean, uninterrupted exit and then a void. Until now. And Naomi knew better than to believe in coincidence. If someone had buried those items in the forest within the past 2 years, it meant one thing. Someone still remembered, and someone was still trying to hide. The last confirmed sighting of the Franklin High Ensemble had been outside a fast food restaurant just off I-5 northbound, 7:08 a.m., June 11th, 2006. A security camera had captured the group laughing near the side window of the bus as they waited in the drive-thru. The timestamp was clean. The bus's license plate was visible. All girls accounted for. After that, nothing. The bus had been driven by a part-time district contractor named Wallace Nettle. He was 54 at the time, quiet, no criminal history, clean license, and passed a voluntary polygraph 3 days after the disappearance. His story never changed. They left Eugene, stopped for breakfast, merged onto the main highway, and followed the printed route toward Lapine. Then, at some point between mile markers 74 and 96, he said the bus broke down. Steam from the engine. Dashboard lights. He'd pulled over onto a service road to call for help. That was the last thing he remembered. He claimed he had been knocked unconscious from behind. When he woke up, it was dark, the bus was gone, and he was lying in a ditch with blood on his temple. Police had searched that area heavily. No tire tracks, no drag marks, no signs of struggle. His injury was real, but shallow. They questioned whether he'd made up the attack to cover something else, panic, negligence, worse. But they never found the bus, never found him lying, and eventually, they let him go. Naomi Reeds found his last known address listed on a DMV renewal form from 3 years earlier, a small duplex in Redmond. She drove out mid-morning and knocked twice before anyone answered. The man who opened the door looked smaller than the file photo. His posture had sagged, shoulders curled inward like years had turned gravity personal. His beard was patchy, his shirt hung loose. "Mr. Nettle," Naomi asked. He blinked, then nodded slowly. "You from the state?" "I'm with the Chandler Police Department. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the 2006 disappearance of the Franklin High Music Ensemble." His expression didn't change. He stepped aside and motioned for her to enter. The apartment smelled of dust and canned soup. A stack of yellowed newspapers sat on the coffee table. On the far wall, above an unused television, hung a photograph of 8 girls in matching concert dresses, arms linked. "I get asked every few years," he said. "Sometimes it's a journalist. Sometimes it's a podcast person. You're the first cop in 5 years." Naomi sat across from him. "We recovered something last week. A storage crate, musical equipment. It may have belonged to the girls." He was silent for a long time. "Then they were happy that morning. I remember that, singing to themselves and tapping on the windows. Do you remember anything unusual about the road you took?" "I took the route the school gave me. Same one they used the year before." "Did you ever leave the highway?" "Was." He hesitated. "Yes." "Why?" "There was construction. A sign said the lane was reduced ahead. I saw a detour, turned off. It looked official." Naomi leaned forward. "You told the original officers you pulled off because of engine trouble." "I did." He looked away. "It started overheating after the detour. I thought I could make it back onto the highway, but the engine started smoking. So I turned onto a smaller road to get clear." "Do you remember the name of that road?" He shook his head. "No signs, just a gravel turnoff. Trees on both sides." She pulled out a topographic map and unfolded it on the table. "Can you point where you think you were?" He stared at the lines for a long time, then tapped his finger in a spot about 10 miles east of the official route. "Here, I think." Naomi drew a red circle. Did anyone ever confirm that detour existed? No. And you didn't imagine it? He looked up sharply. I was a driver for 16 years. I know what a state detour sign looks like. She nodded. And no one else has ever said the road existed. No. She folded the map. Mr. Nettle, we may have a new lead. If you're willing, I'd like you to come with me to where we found the crate. Maybe seeing the terrain will help you remember more. He hesitated, looked at the photograph on the wall. Then he said, I owe them at least that. That afternoon, they arrived at the Forest Service trail near Crooked Spur. Wallace didn't say much during the ride. He stared out the window, hands clasped tight in his lap. When they stepped out onto the trail, the heat was dry. The sun filtered through thick pines, and the silence was oppressive. Naomi led him to the flag site. He froze when he saw it. Do you recognize this spot, Curioso? He nodded slowly. The trees are taller now, but yes, I've been here. Naomi's pulse quickened. When he turned in a slow circle. This was where I woke up. I swear it. She stepped closer. You're sure? He looked at her, eyes filling. This is the place. She radioed in the update, voice steady. Possible driver confirmation, match with original testimony, requesting ground-penetrating scan across 50-yard radius. She clicked off. Something had always been here. Now what, for the first time in a decade, someone else could see it too. The Forest Service topo map was printed in 2005. Naomi had checked. It listed all primary and secondary roads within the Crooked Spur Preserve and surrounding areas. Fire trails, service access, seasonal routes. Every line had a name. Every line had a purpose. Except the one Wallace Nettle had pointed to. It didn't exist. Not on the 2005 map, not on the updated 2006 version, not on satellite overlays from the past 20 years. It was a ghost path described by the man who'd driven into it and woken up alone, but absent from any official record. Naomi requested historical land use files from the State Transportation Archives. Most roads, even temporary ones, were documented somewhere: fire detours, construction diversions, ranger access routes, but no permit existed for roadwork on Route 14 between mile markers 74 and 96 during the second week of June 2006. No planned detour, no reports of closure. She drove the highway herself, midday, clear sky, engine humming. At mile 82, just past a bend in the hill, she saw it. The angle wasn't obvious from the road. You had to know what to look for. A break in the tree line, overgrown now, almost sealed shut with brush and low branches. But just enough remained the impression of ruts beneath the pine needles. A slope that dropped sharply, then vanished into green. She pulled off and stepped out, walked to the edge, stood there. No signs, no barriers, no markers. But the land had been cut. This had once been a road, and someone had erased it. Back at the office, Naomi pulled the 2006 incident file and reviewed the aerial imagery taken during the original search. The area surrounding mile 82 had been scanned by air twice in the week after the girls went missing. Both passes had used infrared to detect heat signatures and patterns of ground disturbance. The original team had focused on the east side of the highway, assuming the bus had drifted off-road after engine failure. The west side, where the ghost road lay, had been dismissed as too steep for vehicle access. But Wallace had turned left, not right. And the satellite record from June 12, 2006, one day after the disappearance, showed faint tire lines disappearing into the trees on the west. Lines that were gone just a week later. She enlarged the image, enhanced the contrast, marked coordinates. Then she picked up the phone. The next morning, a team of ground surveyors arrived with lighter equipment. It took 4 hours to scan the slope and reconstruct the buried path using density mapping. What emerged was unmistakable: a serviceable roadbed, roughly 10 feet wide, extending a quarter mile into the forest before cutting sharply west toward a dry creek bed. It had been covered with soil, layered with pine straw, seeded with fast-growing mosses. Whoever buried it knew what they were doing. Naomi stood with the tech as the render loaded. "This is professionally done," he murmured. Not some guy with a shovel? She nodded. Can we trace how far it goes? Possibly, but the further we get, the less intact the track will be. Could take days. I'll take hours. Start with the first turn. By mid-afternoon, they had uncovered a second disturbed area, just beyond the bend. Buried beneath a foot of packed earth was a rusted metal bracket, the kind used to secure bus axles during maintenance. Naomi crouched beside the tech. Could this have come loose naturally? He shook his head. This was pulled off, wrenched out of place. You don't get that kind of tear from a mechanical failure. Someone took this apart. She stood slowly. It was no longer a question of if the girls had been taken off the grid. It was a question of why, and who had the authority to build a road meant to disappear. The path was clearer now. Once the soil cover had been cleared by lidar-guided ground teams, what had looked like a random patch of forest began to reveal form-crushed gravel beneath the humus, a line of weathered wood staves half sunk in earth, even fragments of reflective paint, scuffed thin but still visible when struck by light. Naomi walked it slowly, 10 yards behind the forensics crew, eyes scanning everything. The road curved west for nearly half a mile before it split in two. One branch veered into a dry wash and disappeared. The other rose slightly onto a ridge flanked by dense pine stands and flattened brush, as though heavy equipment had once passed through. At the top of the rise, they found the structure. It wasn't large, not visible from above. Trees had grown up around it on three sides. Satellite recon missed it due to the canopy cover. The roof was low, aluminum, the siding painted in weather-faded beige. A service building, maybe, military surplus, or something meant to pass for unimportant. There were no windows, no signage, and no visible door. Naomi circled the structure slowly. On the back side, a narrow stairwell sank into the ground, half choked with pine needles and years of runoff. At the bottom a door, steel, handle missing, hinges welded, no keyhole. She turned to the forensic engineer beside her. How fast can we open it? He studied the welds. You want quiet or fast? Fast. It took 15 minutes and a portable saw to breach the door. Inside, the smell was what hit them first. Not rot, not mold. Something colder. Stale industrial air. As if it hadn't been breathed in years. The corridor was narrow, lined in sheet metal, with conduit piping running along the ceiling. Emergency lights blinked faintly overhead, fed by a backup battery unit still holding a charge after a decade. The hallway extended 15 feet before ending in a steel wall, with two doors left and right. They opened the left. It was a storage room. Cots stacked 4 high, folding chairs, empty water jugs, plastic bins labeled by hand food, hygiene, backup batteries, most of it untouched, all of it dusty. Then the right, a small control center. 2 monitors dead now, but once connected to feeds, a switchboard, labeling stickers, XT gate, perimeter, intake, a desk, bolted to the wall. On it, a binder. Naomi flipped it open. Inside a grid of dates, names, check-in times, supply logs, one column labeled RTMABC, another marked Visit C. The entry stopped in 2012. Someone had been here, regularly, for 6 years. And then, silence. The forensics team swept the space. No signs of struggle, no blood. But Naomi stood staring at the last 2 pages of the log. The final entries had been written in red ink. Unlike the black of all previous pages, one name appeared more than once. Rand's mem. Next to it, clear, confirmed, secure. She recognized the name. It had come up once in the original file. A subcontractor who had helped coordinate transportation routes for school events in 2006. Never a direct employee, no permanent address, no record after 2009. She pulled her phone and dialed her department. Run a background check, she said. Matthew Rand's Oregon ID, possibly linked to Franklin High contract logistics in 2006. I want everything. As she waited for the report, she stared at the final line of the logbook. No contact since drop. Instructions unchanged. The ink bled slightly, as if written with a heavy hand. Naomi took a breath. This wasn't an accident. This was built, funded, hidden. The girls weren't taken by chance. They were routed. Back at the ranger station, Naomi laid the binder flat across the conference table. The regional field director from the FBI was already en route. 2 agents from the State Bureau of Emergency Management had arrived an hour earlier. The room was thick with coffee, tension, and maps. One of the state men looked up from the open file. There's no record of this building in any Forest Service lease or infrastructure registry. It's not on the books, not even under decommissioned holdings. Naomi nodded. That's the point. You think this was military? What are you men on? I think someone wanted it to look like it could be. The agent tapped a pen against the supply log. How many girls did you say went missing? 8. He pointed to a column labeled Unit 1A, capacity 8 beds. This wasn't a coincidence. Naomi didn't answer. She looked at the last page again. The red ink, the word drop, and the silence that followed. Something had happened here, but this wasn't where it ended. It was just where it stopped being seen. Matthew Rands hadn't filed taxes since 2011. No social media, no voter registration, no known employer, no property records. He existed in state files only as a single name on a school vendor list from the spring of 2006. Event Solutions NW contracted for route planning and transportation logistics during inter-school music events. Franklin High had used them twice, once in April for a festival in Salem, once in June for the retreat no one returned from. Naomi sat at her desk, the service binder open beside her. Every time she read his name in red ink, she thought about the structure in the forest, the kind of operation that needed coordinated delivery, record keeping, quiet supply drops. That didn't run without someone like Rands. The secretary at the now-defunct Event Solutions NW gave a disconnected number. The business itself had dissolved in 2009. Naomi called 2 former clients. Neither remembered the man, but one had a name, Christopher Daly, a consultant who had occasionally worked with Rands. He now ran a small events company out of Portland. She called. He answered on the 3rd ring. Mr. Daly, my name is Detective Naomi Reeds. I'm calling in relation to Matthew Rands. You worked together in the early 2000s. A pause, then, Jesus, that name takes me back. Haven't heard it in years. I'm working an old case, 2006, school travel contracts. You remember anything unusual about him? Daly hesitated. He was efficient, quiet, the kind of guy who never stayed anywhere long, came in, made things work, vanished again. Why? I need to find him. Another pause. I don't have a number, but last time I saw him was 2012. He showed up at a memorial fundraiser something for missing children. Odd. Right, he wasn't on the invite list. I remember thinking it was weird. Said he was helping set up on behalf of a foundation called the Ark Trust. Naomi wrote it down. You sure that's what he said? I'm sure, blue badge. The logo was a dove. That night, Naomi searched the Oregon Charity database. No listing for the Ark Trust, but the logo matched something else. A registered nonprofit out of Montana Ark Educational Support Network, founded in 2005 by a former choral director named Derek Halberd. She clicked through the site. Outdated HTML, generic mission statements, a few broken links, one photo. A music competition from 2006. 8 girls standing on stage, smiling. The caption read, finalists from the Franklin High Ensemble, taken June 10th, 2006. Special thanks to our partners at CPF Foundation. Naomi froze. CPF. 3 letters she'd seen before. Not in any school file, but in the binder, top right corner. Stamped beside the word Visit C. She pulled the image, ran it through Registry Cross Search. CPF Caraway Performance Fund. A private grant group for arts and athletics founded in the late 90s by Vincent Caraway, a former national cheer coach turned arts patron. High profile, polished, donor to over 24 school programs across 4 states, emphasis on youth performance. She pulled his public speaking events, fundraising circuits, his foundation's board of directors. There he was. Photo from 2014, keynote address, standing beside 2 men. One was listed as a logistics manager, Rance. Hair grayer, face fuller, but unmistakable. Naomi leaned back in her chair. Rance hadn't disappeared. He'd just changed where he stood. She contacted Caraway's foundation office in Seattle, posed as a development researcher, asked for a brochure, confirmed mailing address, noted that the logo had changed slightly more stylized, but the initials remained. Then she opened the Franklin case file and pulled the original volunteer list from the 2006 choral event. Caraway's name wasn't on it, but the CPF fund had been listed as an in-kind sponsor. Donated buses, donated routes, donated help. Naomi marked the paper. This wasn't about 8 girls on a school trip. This was about access. It took 3 days to find a viable lead. Naomi sent subpoenas for CPF Foundation's recent vendor contracts, tracked business licenses, filed FOIA requests for transport permits in neighboring states. Most of it was boilerplate legal noise to make it look like nothing had changed. But then, buried in a shipping invoice registered under a secondary LLC, she found it. Stagelight Outreach Services, recipient CPF Foundation. Location Rose Lake, Idaho, 1 delivery address, 1 point of contact, M. Rands. Rose Lake wasn't on most maps. A town of 900 nestled between state roads and abandoned mining trails. 1 school, no hospital, 1 sheriff who also served as the town's volunteer fire chief. Naomi booked a motel under a different name and made the 5-hour drive in an unmarked state vehicle. She arrived just after noon on a Tuesday. The town looked like a movie set. American flags in front yards, a white church with a bell tower, a diner with a sign that said serving since 1962. She drove through slowly, not stopping, just observing. At the far end of town, just past the last gas station, was a gravel road marked only by a small wooden placard, CPF Summer Enrichment Camp, private access. She parked a quarter mile down, walked the rest on foot. At the gate, no guard, just a metal bar arm and a keypad. Beyond it, 3 low buildings painted beige, matching the style of the forest structure. A small amphitheater, a tool shed, a gravel loop with 6 parked vans, all unmarked except for small letters near the license plates, CPF 04 to CPF Sonin. She watched for 40 minutes. No movement. Then, a boy, maybe 11, emerged from the nearest building with a counselor trailing behind. The boy was laughing, normal, healthy. Naomi exhaled. This was a functioning camp. Kids were here. And if kids were here, so was he. That evening, Naomi booked a seat at the diner's counter, ordered black coffee, and asked the waitress if she knew a man named Rands. The woman didn't blink. Matthew comes in twice a week, tall, always wears vests, bit quiet, but polite. Where's he live? The waitress smiled. You a friend of his? Naomi smiled back. Just passing through? He stays out at the CPF Lodge. Only staff live there. She stirred her coffee. People like him? The waitress shrugged. Not much to like or dislike. He keeps to himself, pays in cash. Naomi returned to her car, parked on a bluff above the lodge road. The moon was out, half hidden by clouds, but the gravel below caught the light just enough. At 10:38 p.m., a white pickup rolled down the path. Naomi recognized the logo etched on its side, a stylized phoenix. CPF. She followed from a distance. He drove 5 miles south, then pulled into a gas station. She stayed in her car. When he stepped into the shop, she snapped a photo through her windshield. It was him. Older, beard trimmed, body thicker. But it was the same man from the binder. Matthew Rands. She reported back to her department that night. An arrest warrant would take 48 hours. She wouldn't wait that long. Naomi returned to the camp the next morning and requested a meeting. She presented herself as a parent liaison from the Oregon Education Trust and asked for the CPF administrator. They led her to an office in the rear building. Matthew was already there. He looked up, smiled. Can I help you? His eyes didn't flicker. No recognition. But something tightened in his posture, shoulders rigid, mouth too still. Naomi sat, introduced herself with the alias. She asked about the camp, the mission, the enrollment numbers. He answered smoothly. Trained? She let him talk for 7 minutes. Then she slid the photo across the desk, the one from the binder. Him, Caraway, 8 girls in the background. He looked down, just for a second, then smiled again. That's not me. Naomi didn't blink. That's you in 2006. You're mistaken. I'm not. He leaned back. Unless you have a court order, this conversation is over. Naomi stood. As she left the office, she passed a room with boxes stacked waist-high, marked stage materials, retired. She paused, just long enough to note one label, FHS Music, June 2006. She didn't need a search warrant to see what she already knew. Someone was erasing something, and they hadn't finished yet. Naomi submitted the warrant request at 7:12 a.m., supported by sworn testimony, photographic evidence, and connections between CPF Foundation, Matthew Rands, and the original disappearance of the Franklin High Ensemble. It was approved by 9:30. By 10:10, she was back on the road, this time not alone. A local sheriff's unit accompanied her 3 deputies and a logistics officer. A state vehicle followed behind, carrying 2 investigators from the Attorney General's office. A search team had been dispatched in parallel to secure any records, files, or electronics before they could be removed. But when Naomi arrived at the CPF summer camp gate just after 11 a.m., the gravel lot was empty. No vans, no children, no counselors. The metal gate stood open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, the buildings were quiet, the lights were off, paper cups littered a picnic table, a soccer ball lay deflated under a bench. Naomi moved quickly, checking the main office first. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the filing cabinet drawers had been pulled out and emptied onto the floor. The desktop computer was gone. The only thing left was a single piece of paper taped to the wall above the receptionist's desk. It read, "Canceled, staff reassignments underway." No signature, no date. She turned to the deputy beside her. "They ran." The deputy nodded grimly. "Sometime last night, looks like." They searched the rest of the camp. The kitchens had been cleared, food stores taken, trash bins emptied. The bunkhouse rooms still had bedding, but no personal items, no signs of children. Naomi estimated at least 24 people had moved out fast, and with coordination. In the shed, behind a rack of sports equipment, they found a fire pit. Still warm. Inside, shredded paper, plastic remnants, the warped casing of a destroyed hard drive. They'd burned everything, but not everything burned evenly. At the edge of the pit, a deputy crouched and lifted something with tongs, a metal ring, scorched on one side, but mostly intact. Naomi took it and turned it in her gloved hands. An engraved tag. Worn, but legible. Franklin High School, property of FHS Music Dep. Her stomach turned. Not because it proved what she already knew, but because it confirmed what someone had just tried to erase. The document team combed through the ash pile for 2 hours. Most files were beyond recognition, but a few fragments survived. One scrap bore a logo CPF. Another listed a date, 06/2/12 to 2006, the day after the girls disappeared. Below it, a name, Van Drop Southgate. No address, no further context. But Naomi recognized the phrasing. It matched a line from the Forest Bunkers binder. Confirmed, drop complete. She circled the date and stared at it. This wasn't just a camp. It was a hub. By mid-afternoon, local news caught wind of law enforcement presence. Naomi declined interviews. A gag order had been filed, but that didn't stop photos from spreading online images of the empty buildings, the state agents, the paper tag with the school name. She knew what was coming. Parents, reporters, conspiracy theorists, and the families, they wouldn't stay silent now. At 5:22 p.m., Naomi received a call from the field tech still analyzing the salvage from the fire pit. "We got a partial," the voice said, "from a scorched file folder. Go ahead. It's a schedule. Looks like intake logs." If for what? For performers, Naomi stood motionless. The voice continued. "There's a column marked new talent. All girls, all minors. First entry dated May 2006. Last one, July 2012. 87 names." Naomi gripped the edge of the desk. Any of them matched the Franklin girls. The voice hesitated. "One, M. Thompson. Arrival date June 11, 2006. No departure listed." Naomi exhaled slowly. They didn't just take her. They recorded it. The box came anonymously. No return address. Just a plain cardboard package left outside the front door of the Chandler Police Department at 4:17 a.m., according to the security camera. It sat unnoticed for 3 hours until the day shift checked it in. Naomi opened it wearing gloves. Inside was a plastic sleeve containing photocopies of personnel files, a manila envelope, and one printed photo faded, folded, but intact. The image showed 8 girls on a stage, mid-performance, matching dresses, sheet music in hand. A single man stood off stage, arms crossed, watching. The caption, written in faint pen beneath the photo, "Final Performance CPF Session 1, date June 10, 2006. She knew the image. It matched one she'd seen online from a now-defunct CPF event blog. But this version had something the others didn't. A signature in the lower corner. Stylized, deliberate. V. Caraway? She stared at the curve of the pen strokes, the way the C looped beneath the name. It matched old cheerleading competition programs from the 90s, the CPF fund letters from 2005, even the file headers on sponsorship requests from Franklin High. He hadn't changed it in 20 years. She called Laura Jennings first, Mia's mother. Laura had kept every article, every photo, every flyer. She'd built a personal archive of the Franklin disappearance so complete that detectives once called it obsessive. Now, it was a lifeline. Naomi arrived at her home just before lunch. Laura greeted her with a quiet, searching expression. She'd seen the news. She hadn't called. She'd been waiting. They sat in the back room, half den, half memorial. On the far wall, the same photo, framed. 8 girls, sheet music, the man in the shadows. "You've had this the whole time?" Naomi asked. Laura nodded. "It was mailed to me anonymously 2 weeks after they vanished. No note, no explanation. I thought maybe it was a cruel joke." "Did you show it to the original task force?" "I tried. They said it didn't prove anything." Naomi held up her copy. "Ours just showed up this morning. Same handwriting, same signature." Laura sat forward. "Then it's real." Naomi nodded. "And it's him." She returned to the department and pulled every archived CPF file she could find. Sponsorship documents, grant requests, tour planning. Buried inside a Franklin High internal memo from 2005 was a signed approval letter authorizing performance coordination through Caraway Performance Fund, with logistical support provided by Mush Renz. At the bottom, in bold ink, V. Caraway, Program Director. He hadn't just funded it. He'd orchestrated it. She compiled everything into a briefing folder and brought it to the AG's office by 4 p.m. They scanned the documents slowly, asked careful questions. She laid it out plainly. Caraway used CPF as a front. Rands ran logistics, including routing and drop coordination. At least one intake log had the name of a Franklin student. They had operated from at least 2006 to 2012. And now, after 10 years, someone had begun erasing the rest. The assistant AG leaned back in his chair. "Do we know where he is now?" Naomi shook her head. "He went quiet 2 years ago. No public appearances, no active events, but CPF still has a mailing address in Portland, and his name is still on the tax filings. You think he's hiding in plain sight? I think he never thought anyone would get this close." That evening, Naomi called in a contact from the FBI's Portland office agent Dana Kessler, with whom she'd worked once on a missing juvenile case. Kessler agreed to look into CPF's Portland HQ. An hour later, she called back. I just drove past the office, dark, locked, but there's movement upstairs. It's a business suite, right? Used to be. Now it's privately owned. Guess who's on the lease? Caraway. His lawyer, but same address, same access. Naomi paused. Keep eyes on it. I'll be there in the morning. That night, Naomi reviewed the photo again. 8 girls, a stage, a man in shadow. And now, finally, a name that couldn't hide behind foundations or logos. Vincent Caraway hadn't vanished. He'd just written himself into the margins. They entered the apartment at 7:13 a.m. The building was 3 stories tall, a converted bank from the 1950s, now repurposed into private offices and upper-level residential units. Caraway's listed address was on the 2nd floor, Suite 2B, registered under a shell company that had last filed taxes 6 years ago. No one answered the knock. The door was locked. Naomi showed the warrant. A locksmith arrived within 10 minutes. The FBI agent stepped in first. Inside, silence. The apartment was sparsely furnished. A small kitchen, a recliner, a bed with hospital corners, framed photos on the wall landscapes. No people. A filing cabinet beneath the window. Locked. A laptop on the desk. Closed. A portable cassette player on the nightstand. Naomi walked carefully, noting details. No dishes, no garbage, no signs of rushed departure. He hadn't run, but he wasn't there. Kessler opened the filing cabinet with a pry tool. Most of it held financials boring, deliberate, outdated. At the bottom, a small cardboard box, inside 4 cassette tapes, labeled by hand. Naomi picked one up. Session 2A, rehearsal. She inserted it into the player and pressed play. A burst of static. Then music. A piano chord, off-key, laughter. A girl's voice. Can we try that one again? Another voice, older, male, calm. Smile, girls. The stage is your sanctuary. Naomi froze. The room stayed still, only the soft hum of the tape. She glanced at Kessler, who nodded, already pulling gloves to label and bag the tapes. The voice continued. Let's take it from measure 32. Harmonies only. A pause. Amber, I want you leading the lower part. Amber. Naomi stepped backward, stomach turning. It wasn't just rehearsal. It was them. She listened to all 4 tapes that afternoon in the forensic audio room at the state lab. Each ran just under 30 minutes. Each sounded the same commands, corrections, occasional jokes. The man never shouted, never threatened. He was patient, encouraging, practiced. That made it worse. He wasn't forcing them to rehearse. He was building trust, creating ritual, layering obedience into structure. On tape 3, a girl cried mid-phrase. The music stopped. His voice, no tears in music. Rachel, you know the rules. Silence. Then the piano started again. The forensics team confirmed that 3 of the voices matched known family recordings of the Franklin girls' birthday videos, school concerts. They couldn't confirm the rest without access to DNA or direct identification. But Naomi didn't need a match. She knew this was real. This was recent, and he had kept it. The laptop was encrypted, the hard drive partially wiped, but the data recovery team salvaged fragments, mostly spreadsheet exports. Some labeled rotation schedule, private set, B, and intake history. One list caught Naomi's eye. Departure notes, Jules 2012. 3 names, 2 marked with an X. Next to one of them, Amber, resistance, removed from program. See file 9F. She stared at the screen, then stood. Amber Green hadn't vanished. She'd been removed, and someone had written it down. That night, Naomi returned to her office and sat alone with the tapes. She played them one by one, without pause, without note-taking, just listening. They weren't rehearsals. They were documentation, control, conditioning, Obedience dressed as performance. She imagined the girls, ages 14 to 16, rehearsing in a hidden bunker, unsure of where they were, trusting a man whose voice never changed. And she imagined the one who cried, and the one who resisted. At 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzed. Kessler, short message. He's gone, got on a bus last week. No ticket name. We're checking terminals. Naomi stared at it for a long time, then turned the tape back on. Let's go again. Girl, he said. No mistakes this time. The hospital room was quiet. Not sterile, just quiet. Beige curtains, a low humming light, the thin smell of antiseptic and old paper. April Green sat near the window, her knees pulled into her chest, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She was 24 now, or maybe 25. She didn't remember the day she turned 18. The nurse had warned Naomi not to expect too much. She speaks when she wants to. Some weeks she won't say a word. Is she stable? She's safe. That's all I can say. April turned when Naomi entered, her eyes distant but tracking. Naomi didn't bring a badge. She brought a plain envelope and a portable cassette player. She sat down, said nothing at first, just waited. Then, quietly, she placed the recorder on the table. I'd like to play you something. You don't have to talk. You don't have to answer. But I think you'll know what it is. She pressed play. It was the third tape. Halfway through, a piano note, then a man's voice. Smile, girls. The stage is your sanctuary. April's body didn't move, but her fingers curled tighter around the blanket. Another voice came through her own, from long ago. You could barely hear it, a correction, a breath. Then his voice again. Amber, you take the low harmony. The blanket slipped off her shoulder. Naomi reached forward and paused the tape. April looked at her for the first time and spoke. That's him. It took 2 hours to record her statement. Not because she hesitated, but because she didn't stop when she began. She described the first day how they were told the bus broke down, that a new campsite had been arranged, that this was still part of the program. She described how they were split into pairs, given uniforms, assigned roles, how everything was made to look like training, just more intense, just more isolated. She described the rules: no questions, no crying, no mistakes. And how, for the first month, no one disobeyed. Then Amber did. He told us she was resistant, that she was disrupting harmony. She tried to sneak out, took a key from a storage bin and hid it in her pillowcase. April's voice wavered. He found it. She didn't finish the sentence. Naomi didn't ask her to. Instead, she asked about the voice. April nodded. He never shouted. He never touched us. But his voice did all the work. He'd say, your instrument is your body. Don't let it go out of tune. She swallowed. That was his threat, that he'd retune us. Naomi pulled out the photograph, the performance image from June 10, 2006. April looked at it a long time. That was the last day. Jalida, do you recognize the man? She pointed, unhesitating. That's Caraway. Son. You're sure? She met Naomi's eyes. I woke up to that voice for 6 years. Naomi left the hospital with the statement in hand. By the time she returned to the precinct, the arrest warrant was approved. The tapes, the signed photo, April's ID, it was enough. The manhunt widened across 4 states, bus terminals, rental agencies, CPF property archives. 2 CPF staffers turned up in Wyoming, interviewed, shaken, but unarrested. One confessed to shredding old files at Caraway's request. Another admitted seeing unusual behavior, but assumed the girls were runaways. No one had seen him since the morning after Naomi's visit. Until someone did. A motel clerk in southern Utah reported a man checking in under the name Victor Rowan. He paid cash, didn't stay the night, left behind only one thing: a flyer tucked into the motel Bible. A CPF performance announcement, June 2006, Franklin High. Naomi flew down that night. She entered the room, found the flyer, on the back, in pen. Not all songs need to end. It wasn't a signature, But it was a promise and a threat. The tip came from a retired park ranger in southern Utah. A man matching Caraway's description had been seen hiking into a restricted canyon near the old Sycamore Baptist compound, an abandoned religious site decommissioned in the late 90s after a fire destroyed part of the chapel. The compound had no roads, no utilities, and no cell reception. It was the perfect place to disappear. By dawn, a tactical team was assembled. FBI, state, local units from 3 counties. Naomi rode with the forward team on a mule-tracked SUV, boots pressed to the floor, hands tight in her lap. They reached the compound perimeter just after 7:00 a.m. The building was smaller than expected, half-crumbling adobe, sun-bleached wood, chapel cross rotting from its mount. A low wind stirred dust across the stone entryway. There were signs of life ashes in the fire pit, a plastic jug near the door, and most disturbing rows of folding chairs arranged neatly in front of what used to be the altar. A performance space. The door was unlocked. They entered with care. Guns raised, flashlights on. Inside empty. No sound, no people. But on the far wall, written in white chalk, "The show was never for you." In the back of the chapel, they found a cot, cans of food, a leather folder. Inside notes, lyrics, set lists, and a journal. Naomi flipped through slowly. The handwriting was meticulous, measured, no rambling, no paranoia, just control. One entry stood out. The girls were always the music. Their voices carried more than melody, they carried memory. What I built was not a prison, it was preservation. And if they hated me for it, they simply misunderstood the structure. Amber broke the silence. But silence has its own logic. Naomi closed the book and exhaled. He was still near. No one sets a stage and walks away from it. The tracker spotted the trail 200 yards north. Boot prints, fresh, steady. They followed it up a switchback path, through scrub brush and dry shale. After 30 minutes, they found him. He was sitting on a rock ledge, looking out across the desert, hands resting on his knees. Not fleeing, not hiding, waiting. Vincent Caraway turned as they approached. He didn't speak, didn't protest, didn't ask what they had or who they were. He simply stood, hands extended, wrists together. When Naomi stepped forward, he looked her in the eye. "You were never supposed to understand," he said. Then he smiled. It was the same smile from the photo, the one from the tapes. She said nothing. They cuffed him. He never asked for a lawyer. The trial took place 13 months later. By then, 2 more survivors had come forward, Kira Thompson and Hannah Lee. Both had been relocated under protection, given therapy, and prepared for testimony. April agreed to speak via closed circuit. The courtroom was sealed, no cameras, no reporters. But every seat was full. The prosecution introduced the tapes first, then the journal, then the names from the intake logs, then April's voice. One line. "He told us the world would forget us faster if we stayed quiet." She paused, then added, "He was wrong." Vincent Caraway was found guilty on 18 federal charges: trafficking, unlawful imprisonment, exploitation of minors, destruction of evidence. He received 4 consecutive life sentences. He showed no emotion when sentenced. But when the judge ordered the tapes played aloud in the courtroom to recognize the names silenced, he turned away, not from guilt, but from memory. The remains of Amber Green were never recovered. But in the final week of the investigation, a shallow grave was discovered near the edge of the Sycamore site. Inside, remnants of a uniform, a necklace, a scrap of handwritten sheet music. It was enough. She was finally brought home. Franklin High held a memorial 2 years later. 8 chairs arranged on the auditorium stage, a single beam of light above each one. No music, no flowers, just silence. Then looked from the wings. April walked out. No fanfare. She simply stood. Then she sang. Soft, unamplified, the same song they had performed in 2006. Her voice cracked once. But she finished. When the lights dimmed, the crowd stayed still for nearly a minute. Then they stood, not clapping, just standing together. The case file was closed in the spring of 2020. Naomi boxed the final documents herself. On the top sheet, she wrote Franklin 8, status resolved, survivors 3, confirmed deceased 2, presumed deceased 3. She paused before sealing the box. Then, on the bottom corner of the form, in pen, she added a single line. They were never forgotten. Then she closed the lid, and the room was quiet again.